All right, microphone over here. Morning, everybody. Wanted to welcome you to the Network Designs Incorporated's Jira Brown Bag series. This is the Jira Stories, Sprint Epics, and Versions. This is going to run live today, and then again next Friday we will be publishing it. It will not be live. It will be this recording. If you have any questions, please go ahead and open up the Hangouts group chat area. If you have any problems finding that, it's in the top left corner of the group chat. Oh, I'm getting feedback here. Let me shut that down. All right, so the group chat area is the blue square box in the top left corner of your Hangouts window. You'll use that to send me any questions that you might have, and I will be more than happy to answer them as we go along. If it's one that's going to take too long, I'll probably acknowledge the question and then just say that we'll come back to it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. It's not going to take us the entire hour, I don't think. But we'll do what we can. We'll see how far we can get within that hour. Okay, so today's topic is Jira, stories, sprints, epics, and versions, and how all that plays together. So what we're going to look at is the breakdown of those components. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my screen share so you can see my presentation, and then we will get started. All right. Everybody can see that, and we should be good to go. Okay, so the Jira Brown Bag series, again, this is the first of this particular version, the stories, sprints, epics, and versions. And the agenda for today is to cover the purpose and then explain what all the components are. Okay, starting with the stories, the sprints, what is a theme, epics, and versions. Then we're going to have a little question time, and I'll give you a couple of resources to use. All right, the purpose of this event is specifically to clarify the various types of vehicles that we use in Agile. We want to better understand those vehicles. We want to have basically the same definition, the same understanding for each of these elements. There's a I will call it a meme for lack of a better term, in Agile that says you have to define done, which basically indicates that if the team all understands the word done as something different, then you're going to have a problem. And so what we're going to do is we're going to define all of these different elements. So we're going to define done. An example I would use is a developer saying that task is done or that element is done means that he's written it, he's probably unit tested it, he's probably got it pushed over to QA, but in his eyes it's done. The same definition would not apply to the PM, for example, who's going to sit back and go, well, that's not publishable, it's not a release component yet because it hasn't gone through all of the various external testing components. It hasn't been unit tested properly by the QA department. It hasn't been 508 tested or UX tested or user acceptance tested, any of these other elements. So we can't guarantee that it's going to work the way that the developer says it does on his machine. So it's not done in the eyes of the PM. So a better definition of the PM's done would be element complete, while the developer would stick with done with that task. So again, we're going to define each of these elements so that everybody's working on the same understanding. That same understanding is going to allow us to better work together in the various components that we're talking about here, the various vehicles. All right, next page, there we go. Okay, user stories. User story, it's the smallest unit of work. So basically the whole point here is that we're taking multiple elements in a project we're breaking those elements down into tasks, and each of those tasks gets completed by someone. So if it's a build task, it goes to a developer. If it's a testing task, it goes to the QA department, so on and so on. If it's an infrastructure task, it would go to the infrastructure team. So in breaking these components up, the best way that Scrum or the Agile methodology has determined is to break them into subcomponents. And each of these subcomponents, the smallest of which is the user story. So the goal of the user story is to return a particular value back to the customer. You want it to be just a few simple sentences in very simple language, and you want it to outline a specific desire. So a clean user story, I have an example here. As a customer, I want to be able to create an account so that I can see the purchase I made in the last year to help me budget for my next year. So that's a report, for example. I want to build a purchase report. So that's a very simple user story, and it's a very concise one, which is what you want. You want a more concise user story. I would rather see multiple user stories over a similar topic than one user story that combines everything into one story. That's just, it becomes too much to manage. So some things to understand about user stories. User stories are not a set of highly detailed requirements, okay? It is very simple. If you're basically saying, as a user, whichever kind of user you are, I want to be able to do this goal so that I can receive this benefit. Now, your type of user, those are called actors when it comes to the user stories. And you're going to have various actors. So, for example, you'd have a client actor, a customer actor. Those could be different. You could have a web customer actor versus a mobile customer actor. You can have administrators, all different levels, content editors. You can break the administration tools down into user managers and content editors and rights managers. So each of these stories is going to apply to one of those roles, one of those users, and one goal that that user has. So if you look at something like Amazon.com's purchasing schema, there's several users there. Let's pick the order administrator as a user. That order administrator has a ton of things that he needs to be able to do. Not just review orders and mark orders for ready for pulling, right? So they can go pull the product off the shelf and ship it. But that ready for pulling has to be broken down into validating payment, validating the shipping and receipt, the shipping and billing addresses, validating that the user or that the product is in stock and not out of stock. So there's you could break those three elements down, those three goals down into several sub-stories. So you can expect a project the size of the Amazon web store to have hundreds of stories, even thousands if it's a big enough project. We're not going to write 20 stories and call it good. We're going to write 200 stories and then break those down further if we have to. So that's your user story. And I'm not seeing any questions on user stories come up in the group chat window. So for those of you that just joined, we're using the group chat window, which is available from the flyout menu on the left side of your Google Hangout window. So the window where you see the presentation, you should have the flyout there. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to hit sprints now. So we've started with the user stories, which is the most granular breakout of product functionality that we're going to build against. The next piece is the sprint, and the sprint is a combination of things. So the sprint first is a duration, it's a period, it's a recurring element that usually has a time frame of 1, 2, or 4 weeks, depending on the team and the way the team works. So you're going to grab a bunch of user stories that have been broken down into tickets. In Jira, we call those tickets issues. So you're going to grab a bunch of these issues, keeping in mind that even though the user story is the smallest breakdown of logical requirement, each user story will have a dozen tickets if it needs. For example, if the user story is like the one that we used, see if I can get this to go back. There we go. The example that we used here was to be able to create an account. So if that's the first user story we're going to bang on, then there's some tickets, there's some issues that have to be laid out in advance, like build the database, define the user account structure, okay? Define the password parameters that we're going to require. Define the infrastructure. What server are we going to use? What database product are we going to use? So each one of those would be a different issue. So you're going to have, let's call it 20 issues just to get this one user story right. Oops, there we go. So each of those issues then gets estimated on how long the developers think it's going to take. That estimation is usually done by committee, and we'll talk more about that in the next brown bag Scrum estimation. So once you've got these tickets estimated, these issues estimated, they each have a weight, a value. And that value, let's say 1 to 5 right now, each one of those 1 to 5 elements is a particular amount of work that you know as a developer, or your developers know, they can accomplish in a certain amount of time. So let's say that each one in a 1 to 5 is an hour. Okay, so we know we're never going to have a ticket that's bigger than 5 hours. Now that's ridiculous, but for this process, we're going to say that. So if I have one ticket and that's 5 hours, and the next ticket is 3 hours, I know I can do both of those tickets in one day because that's 8 hours. If I have 5 tickets that are all 5 hours, that's a total of 25 hours. That's only half a week, a little bit more than half a week. So if my sprint is 2 weeks, we're going to call it 2 weeks. That's what we use at NDi. If my sprint is 2 weeks, I should be able to accomplish about 30 to 35 hours worth of work, taking into account drive-bys and, being late to work for traffic or whatever. We're not going to kill each other. We're going to base it on a 40-hour week with a 35-hour production time. So with that 35 hours of production time, I know that I can do that. I've done it before. I do it regularly. So that 35 points, then, that 35 hours, that 35 points is my velocity for a sprint. I can regularly accomplish 35 points in 2 weeks. Actually, I guess that would be in a week, right? 40 hours a week. So let's just call it 2 weeks for right now. So 35 hours in 2 weeks, that's going to give you a lot of free time. So now I have my velocity. You take that velocity for one person, you multiply it by the number of people on the team, or you have everyone turn in their own velocity. So let's say our velocity for the team for a 2-week sprint is 400 hours. You go and you create this sprint, you collect the issues that are breakouts of each user story, you collect those issues into a group, not exceeding your team's velocity. So again, if I'm the only one on the team and my velocity is 35 hours in 2 weeks, then I can only collect enough issues, enough of the tickets to equal 35 hours over my 2-week sprint. I hope that's clear to everybody. Nobody's giving me any questions, so I'm going to run with it here. So basically, you gather your team velocity and you build your sprint around that team velocity. So the sprint's essentially, it's a cycle that allows regular feedback, okay? The reason that we do a 2-week sprint, or even a 1-week sprint in some cases, is that at the end of 2 weeks, nothing changes during the sprint, okay? Once a team has forecasted the user stories for the sprint and the sprint has started, the Scrum Master, who is the manager of that team for the purposes of the sprint, he is the sprint manager, we'll call him, he requires that nothing changes with that sprint until it's complete. You cannot scope creep during a sprint, okay? So the nice thing, though, is that at the end of 2 weeks, you reevaluate your list of issues. That list is called the backlog. You reevaluate the backlog and you reprioritize your issues, and then you redetermine your next 2-week sprint. That next 2-week sprint has whatever issues didn't get finished in this 2-week sprint and any new top priority issues from the backlog. That includes ones that have been there for a while or ones that your client or your customer might have just put in there during this previous 2-week sprint. So again, it allows for regular feedback from all of the stakeholders on the project, and it allows your customer to handle scope creep without affecting your team. All right. Another benefit is that it allows your teams to stay focused. Their work is always changing. It's always interesting. It's not like you're getting stuck in something and you're just trudging along with it. You actually only have 2 weeks to deal with this set of issues, and then you've got two weeks to deal with a new set of issues. It allows for the team, the members themselves, to estimate their tasks and to determine their velocity better. Let's say, for example, I've got a 1-year project, and in an old-fashioned style, I tell you, hey, I can do 35 or 40 hours a week worth of points. And that's in January. And somewhere in June, I decide I'm going to go water skiing and I get hurt. And I come back and I can't function the same way. But you've built, as the PM has built the project estimation, the projections all on my statement of my velocity. With a sprint, my velocity can change next week. If I know I'm going to be on vacation for 2 days, I'm going to reduce my velocity when I give you my report at the end of this sprint. I'm going to say, hey, I'm gone for 2 days, cut me down to 30, cut me down to 20 points instead. So the sprints allow for a lot more flexibility, a lot more maintainability when it comes to determining the amount of work to be completed within that 2-week time frame. All right, a couple of important things to remember. The first one I already stated, which is once a team forecasts a set of user stories for the sprint and it's started, it's the Scrum Master's job to eliminate any changes, to fend off any changes to the stories or to the sprint content. So it's their job to also maintain scope. We don't want scope creep happening during the sprint. Now, that doesn't mean they can't go to the client, meet with them, and then come up with a new requirement that gets added into a new set of user stories that then gets broken into issues that then gets thrown onto the top of the backlog. All of that work can happen, and then at the next sprint, the top of the backlog is collected, and those items are pulled to be used for the next sprint. All right, so at the end of each sprint, the team is required to deliver a working piece of software. Now, it's a PSI, which means it's a potentially shippable increment. The PSI is really only a valid component once the product has been released, or at least there's a baseline of the product. You're not really going to ship the infrastructure set, which is really, we call it story 0, which builds the environment and builds the database, evaluates and then determines all of your content structure, username types and password layouts and all of that. We're not going to ship a story 0. We probably won't ship anything until story 5 or story 10 in some cases. But at the end of every sprint, you should have a PSI, especially as it gets later in the product. And that PSI is something that you really could ship out. For example, if it's a web-based tool that you're working on, and it's a tool that's already has some maturity to it, and you're still running sprints because you're nearing toward the end of the project, you can theoretically ship out or release to the server the code that you just produced in the sprint. All right, one of the things that that having a proper sprint layout, oops, watch my focus here. Having a proper sprint layout and having appropriate estimates and velocities. One of the nice things about that is called the burn down chart. So the burn down chart is basically a way to visualize the work remaining in your sprint. Now you can use this, you can step this up in volume so that it encompasses every step of your project, from sprints up to story volume, up to themes and epics, and then the entire project. But the way I like to use burn down charts as a developer is specifically for sprint evaluation. So a simple burn down chart, this is an example that I pulled down off of Google, wonderful Google. All right, so it expresses the work remaining in your x-axis, okay, which is your story points, which again, we said just for purposes of this discussion, the story points is 1 point equals an hour, and we'll never have a story, or we'll never have an issue larger than 5. We're going to break everything down to 5 hours. We'll call that a 5 is a large story. So your work remaining is on X. Your estimated time is on Y, which is shown here is just a calendar date. And then the red versus the green line, you've got non-working days in here, and I'm guessing that's a green line, maybe it's gray. So the red line is the remaining elements, it's the remaining number of points in your current sprint, while the gray line is your averaged out velocity. So this isn't your actual velocity. This is the velocity that you're functioning in this sprint. Once you're all finished, you take the burn down chart and you use it to develop your team's velocity for the next sprint. Make sure they're either on track, If they're new to this process, then you're going to want to evaluate this because their estimates could be high, they could be low. You always have at the end of a sprint, you have a sprint closing meeting. In that sprint closing meeting, you're talking about the various types of tasks. You're evaluating the estimates on those tasks, on the issues that were actually created in Jira. You're looking at your accuracy in the evaluations. You're trying to make sure that you accurately estimated, that you accurately tracked your work, and that you accurately tracked your team's velocity. And as an individual, I would always be concerned about accurately tracking my individual velocity so that I can estimate properly when the time comes. Okay, questions? Questions on burn down charts and sprints? I see none. I think we're doing good on time here. Like I said, I have a feeling we're going to finish just a few minutes early, which is okay. All right, so themes. Now, there's two elements here, themes, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek, epics. Themes is a new concept for a lot of us. It's new in NDi. We don't use it a lot yet, but I'm pushing to have us use it more. We have a similar element in NDi that we call component. And the component element is something that Jira provides for. So although we don't use it much, I'm really trying to get us to start picking it up. So a theme is a bunch of work, okay? It's several user stories that relate to each other at a user story level. So for example, if we go back to our customer user story from before, pull that back up here. As a customer, I want to be able to create an account. So a theme here is as a customer. So another user story would be, as a customer, I want to be able to purchase an element from the catalog. As a customer, I want to be able to pay for my order using a credit card. As a customer, I want to be able to set the shipping date of my order further down the road. There's a couple of simple examples. So as a customer is the theme here. The theme is the customer. So the theme itself can be related by actor. Let me get back to the themes page here. It can be related by the feature or by the issue resolution. You can run a sprint against an entire theme if you so chose. That's all about how the backlog gets reordered, gets prioritized. And that, of course, comes from the prioritization of the backlog comes from the PM, the project manager, the product manager, and the client. So for example, if your themes are going to be related by actor, you're going to have something to the effect of the examples I just gave you. As a customer, I want to be able to pay with a credit card. As a customer, I want to set my delivery date to a later date. As a customer, so there's your by actor. But pay with a credit card, set my delivery date, and choose something from the product catalog or view something from the product catalog. Although those are all by customer, they're not the same feature. So if we looked at the same feature, then let's pick the pay feature. So the ability to pay, or let's use view, the ability to view a product. So the ability to view a product, as a customer, I want to be able to view a product. I want to be able to view details about it, photographs, okay, all those components are view a product. As a seller, I want to be able to view a product and edit that product. So their edit elements are going to be totally different than the customer's buy elements. That's where the product feature comes into play. The feature would be view the product element, but by all of the different actors. So you can see that themes are a little bit different than, they're a little bit different than epics, and I'll describe epics in a second, but they are a step up in grouping of related user stories and issues. All right, epics. Epics is the next up in body of work. Now again, themes and epics are very similar. Okay, themes and epics are very similar. Epics are a larger body of work. They are a feature level work, and it could encompass many user stories. So can a theme. But the theme can be grouped by actor, product feature, and issue resolution, where an epic is really developed around a feature. So you would have user or customer login is an epic. Okay, we could call it the customer dashboard, for example, and that would handle them logging in, them seeing their orders, them canceling an order, them adjusting their payments, they're adjusting their address book with their shipping address, billing address, friend's address if they're sending stuff to a buddy, or flowers to your wife. So all of those, that's epics. The stuff is feature based. So your epics are developed over collections of sprints and versions. We'll talk about versions in a second. You cannot necessarily do all of one epic in a sprint. Now you could have a small epic. The epic could be very small, in which case it could be covered over one sprint with no problem. Typically, however, your epics are spanning several sprints. Your scope change in an epic is absolutely expected. Because it spans several sprints, your scope change happens at the beginning of every sprint. And basically, scope change in Scrum, in Agile, is really not the same anymore. It's not what we used to think it was. Since we're not doing, since Scrum is not based on a flat rate for a product. So for example, a flat rate for a product, if you go to a customer and the customer says, I'm going to give you $1,000 to build this website, and here's what goes in it. There's your flat rate for your product. If he comes back a month into it and says, I'm not going to increase the price, however, I do expect to also see this. That's called scope creep. Okay, so that is a change in your scope. So that actually means that you're going to be doing more work for the same amount of money. Scrum and Agile look at it a different way. Scrum says, you pay me by the hour, and however long it takes is how long it takes. And if you extend the scope of the project, it will take me longer to complete the project. And since I'm paid by the hour, I'm not really worried about that, right? If you extend the scope, that's actually job security for us. So with that, scope change in an epic is expected. And I will add that scope change in a theme is also expected. The only place you really can't change the scope in Agile is during a sprint. Okay, one epic will be delivered over several sprints, and the epic scope change is based on the customer changing the priorities from his understanding of the feedback from the PSI, okay, which again is potentially shippable increment. All right. Any questions on epics? No questions on epics. Now, you can also use your burn down charts in epics. So let me get back to the burn down chart for a second. And again, your epic will have all of the issues in them. Therefore, it'll have the appropriate story points. And your epic will be laid out, estimated by the current backlog. So every issue that's in the current backlog, let's say that the epic spans the first 20 issues. And if you're doing 10 issues every 2 weeks approximately, then you know it's going to take you 4 weeks to get this epic done. So that's how you estimate your epics. It's based on your backlog. So if the customer changes the backlog, the epic distance could be pushed out. All right. So again, any questions on epics? No, you guys are either dead or I'm being really clear today. All right. The last component we have is version. All right. So the versioning, you've all seen Microsoft's plan for their development methodology includes versioning. They're coming out with new versions of the OS on a regular schedule. If you've got an Android or an iOS phone, the developers of those little apps that you get on your phones have regular release schedules, or maybe they're not regular, but they regularly release. I'm always getting the update button on my phone. Each of those is a version. You don't version inside the product until you're ready to release the product and push it out to the public or to your customer or whatever that push out element is. And then you're now working on the new version while your customer is using the new version. And your sprint process is functioning against the newest version. At the end of every sprint, we come back to the PSI, potentially shippable increment. And that PSI now becomes version .xyz. And those are not necessarily released. They can be, because that's what the whole point behind the PSI is to make it releasable. So when you look at your Windows, for example, and you get it point number, this is why. They're releasing not just the version, but then they're releasing subversions at the end of a couple of sprints. For example, say the version for Windows 7 comes out, 2 weeks it's out, and they're getting the same repeated error. So they go in, from hundreds of customers, they go in, they fix that bug, repair that error, and then send out the PSI. Once that increment is completed and that bug fix got shoved into the nearest sprint, it got completed and then pushed out to the public. That's how your PSI works. Okay, so your versions are typically developed over a collection of sprints, just like the epic is. Because a version is going to contain multiple epics or parts of them, multiple stories, and certainly multiple issues, in some cases hundreds of issues. So versions versus sprints, or as I wrote it on the screen, sprints versus versions. At the end of each sprint, the team should be able to ship the software. Okay, so that's back to the PSI. A version is a collection of the sprint changes that the product owner actually ships. So an epic versus, a sprint versus a version. As you're running your sprints, again, I said it's a potentially shippable increment. They don't ship every sprint. So let's say you don't ship for 20 sprints. That sprint that you do ship, that version, that right there becomes the version, and it is a culmination of the previous 20 sprints plus the previous product. All right, is that clear? So that's the difference between a version and a sprint, where they both end up with a PSI. You're just drawing a line in the sand for the version. The version scope can change. It's very common, just like it is in an epic. As the customer takes feedback from the PSI or from the version's release. Again, if we go back to Microsoft, if they release a bunch of software and find a bug, they're going to release a new version shortly. That's after them fixing it a bunch of times in the sprints. Well, all of those bug fixes that just got rolled up to the top of the backlog got picked up in the next sprint and got repaired. Those, they weren't counting on those. That's scope creep. So again, your scope creep is common in your versioning. All your changes to the version should be made known to all of the stakeholders so that everyone remains on the same page. And by all the stakeholders, I mean all the developers, all the QA people, your BAs, which is your business analysts, that's your requirements gatherers and writers, all your tech writers. Everybody needs to know, because that has to be accommodated for. The version change has to be accommodated for elsewhere in the product. All right, so that's versions. Anybody have any questions on versions? We are rolling through this today. Did I skip one? Nope, there we go. All right, so questions and resources. I'm going to bring it back out to you to see if anybody has any questions. Okay. All right, yes, I can show the, you roll back to the themes page again. Again, this is a new element. So the question was, can you go over themes again really quick? Themes are a new element in NDi. So again, your theme is similar to the component in Jira. Jira offers components. Your theme is a relationship between the stories by either actor or feature or resolution. Now that relationship, it's really nothing more than a collector, okay? A container. Look at it as a way to group the stories. And when you're grouping stories, you're also grouping issues, because your issues are related directly to a story. So if we look at the tree model here, you've got one version contains several epics. Each epic contains several user stories. Each user story contains several issues. And the issues are the actual work that the employees do. They're the actual work that your team does. Throwing themes into all of that just gives you another way to group any of those components. You can have multiple epics in a theme. You can have multiple issues in a single theme. You can have multiple stories in a theme. So multiple issues, for example. If you have multiple issues in a single theme, and they all are fixed by the same database change, then they are all related by issue resolution. So your issue resolution is the theme to collect all of those different issues. if we look at user stories, every user story that relates to the system administrator is in the system administrator theme. You could pull up a theme, mobile users, and every story that relates to doing anything on your product according to the, or from the user's, mobile user's perspective, so tablets or the new flip-top laptops, or that look like a tablet, or your cell phones, any of those guys are going to be your mobile users. That's all one theme, and that would cross over multiple user stories. It certainly could cross over multiple epics. So a theme is just another way of grouping. All right, so that's themes again. I hope that clarifies themes a little bit for everyone. That's why I like themes better than components, because really components are strictly physical components within the product, according to Jira. But themes are theoretical grouping within the product. So it just makes more sense to me to use that, because to enact themes in Jira, all we would do is define the themes in advance and then use keywords to tag each sprint, epic, version or issue with that keyword. And then you could pull up by keyword, by tag, you pull up customer or mobile. Boom, there's two different themes, and everything that has anything to do with mobile comes up in that theme. All right, so again, the whole purpose behind this class today was to put everyone on the same page, so that when one person says theme, they know what they're talking about, and everybody else in the room knows what they're talking about. So if you say, oh, hey, I looked at the mobile theme for this product and I see we're missing this actor, everybody's going to go, oh, okay, I gotcha. They're not going to be confused. We all have the same understanding of version, epic, theme, sprint, and issue now, and probably component, even though I didn't directly cover it. Okay, so questions and resources, and back to the questions again. Here are some resources that are great resources for you if you want to get deeper into each of these. This was the 10,000 foot level of each of these definitions, but it really was tailored for how we do business at NDi. You're welcome to ping me if you have any questions. I'm always available for everyone. My information's on the next slide. I'll leave that up for you. So for delivery vehicles, the Atlassian documentation, for the user stories, epics, and themes, a really great definition is over at the Scrum Alliance. Mountain Goat Software, I love those guys. They're really great with Scrum planning and estimating. And so they define user stories, epics, and themes also. So you can go bang on those pages, get a little bit better idea about what's going on. All right, so here is the how to contact Dave page. You can see the Google address at the top is the Confluence page where this particular outline and slideshow are being archived. So you'll be able to get to it. It's there now. Go check it out. If you can't see it, let me know. And as long as you're within the NDi Corporation, I am more than happy to give you access to it. So the Google address below is to my personal Confluence space. And there's a lot of great information there on how to use Jira and Confluence, on how to do the QA testing, because if you don't know already, I'm the QA lead for NDi. So there's all kinds of information there. And we've got a lot of great brownbacks coming up. And I'm going to do my best to record every one of them so that they will be available for review and future training in perpetuity. I hope I used that reference right. All right, everyone. Let me drop this page. There we are. Click escape to exit the slideshow. It is 12:50. We finished with 10 minutes to spare. I'm going to give you back 10 minutes of your life. And there you go. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. My information's all on that Confluence page. All right. Thank you very much. And you guys all take care.